So, what happens when a simple reminder about an oath, well, what happens when it explodes into a massive political firestorm? Over just 48 hours, that's exactly what we saw. It put a group of lawmakers on a collision course with the president, and it brought up some huge questions about the law, loyalty, and a whole chain of command. Let's break down how it all went down.
Everything kicked off with this single line. Now, you might think this sounds pretty straightforward, right? It's a fundamental principle that's taught to every single U.S. service member. But in this specific context, this reminder of a duty that already exists, well, it became the spark for a pretty unprecedented conflict between the White House and Congress.
All right, so our story really gets going on a Tuesday. A group of lawmakers put out a video, and it had a very specific audience in mind: America's military and intelligence professionals.
And just look at who was sending this message. I mean, this was not just some random group of politicians. Every single one of them is a veteran of the military or the intelligence community. You've got a former CIA officer, a Navy captain, an Army Ranger. You get the idea. They were speaking from real personal experience because they had all taken the exact same oath they were about to talk about.
And here it is. This was the heart of their message. They weren't calling for people to disobey orders willy-nilly. They were calling for allegiance to something bigger that they all shared, that oath to the Constitution. It was basically a call for vigilance, suggesting that maybe the biggest threats to that oath weren't coming from overseas, but from pressures right here at home. For about a day, the video just sat there. It seemed like the White House hadn't even noticed. But then, on Thursday morning, that silence was completely shattered. President Trump went on social media, and his response was furious, and it escalated fast. Just look at this timeline. We're talking about a span of only 73 minutes. The language just gets more and more intense. At 9:08 a.m., it's a call for their arrest and a trial. Just 9 minutes later, the word traitors is back, this time with lock them up, and then, by 10:21 a.m., the accusation of seditious behavior is tied directly to the death penalty. So let's just pause and be really clear about what this means. The sitting president of the United States had just publicly called for the arrest and potentially the execution of elected members of Congress. And why? For reminding service members of their legal duties. Now, the president used the word sedition. That is an incredibly serious charge. So what does it actually mean in a legal sense? And, did what the lawmakers said even come close to fitting that definition? Well, it turns out the legal bar for sedition is extremely high. Legal analysts, including those over at Fox News, were quick to point this out. Sedition requires the use of force. Just words alone, especially words that are just restating a law that's already on the books, that doesn't meet the definition. Not even close. This right here, this really gets to the core of the whole conflict. On one side, you've got the president's accusation of sedition, and on the other, you have the legal reality that service members actually have a duty to disobey unlawful orders. The lawmakers were just restating a legal obligation, but the president framed it as a crime. Okay, so by that afternoon, as the seriousness of the president's post really started to sink in, the White House had to go into damage control mode. The scramble was on to manage the fallout. And then, just before 2 p.m., this headline hits the wires from Reuters. I mean, just think about that for a second. That is an absolutely astonishing sentence to see coming from the U.S. government. They had to issue a formal denial that the President of the United States wanted to execute his political opponents in Congress. Later on, at a press briefing, the administration tried to change the story. The press secretary claimed the lawmakers were telling service members to defy lawful orders. But a reporter immediately corrected her, pointing out that crucial difference. They actually said illegal orders. That little back and forth captured the entire debate in just a few seconds. So why such an extreme reaction to what is essentially a statement of law? Well, this whole blow-up wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was tied into a much bigger debate that was going on about presidential power and the use of the military. Let's quickly break down that context. First, there were reports that a top military lawyer was worried that some recent strikes near Venezuela could be considered extrajudicial killings. Second, the administration was getting heat for potentially violating the War Powers Act. That's the law that limits a president's power to commit troops without Congress's okay. And third, some analysts thought maybe this was a political tactic, a way to rally the base and enforce party unity at a time when it seemed to be slipping. So, faced with these threats from the president, what did the lawmakers do? Well, they put out a joint statement. They didn't back down an inch. In fact, they doubled down on their original message. They reaffirmed their lifelong commitment to that oath,
and they condemned what they called the president's calls for our murder.
And they finished their statement with this really powerful, historic command: don't give up the ship. It was a clear message of defiance, of perseverance. They were framing their stance not as some modern political fight, but as a defense of timeless American principles that they believed were under threat.
And that leaves us with this final, really critical question. In a moment of crisis, when that oath to the Constitution is really put to the test, who gets to decide where the line is between lawful dissent and treason? Is it the commander-in-chief? Is it Congress? Or is it the individual, the person who actually took the oath? That, in the end, is what this whole firestorm was really about.